many of you probably know, a couple of weeks ago, I attended Config, and this is the presentation about it that I have lovingly called Why Free Trial Cancellations Are Fascinating, How Escalators Can Ruin an Event, and the Best Soup Dumplings in San Francisco. I know, it's a mouthful, but I think, we'll get through it. So first you might be wondering, what is Config? What is it? So Config is an annual design conference put on by Figma. And this is actually the first time that it was in person since 2020, and 8,000 people came together at this conference center in San Francisco. Gonna wanna keep that number in your brain for later. It's a time where we talked about new releases. You were able to meet a bunch of interesting people, hear about ways that teams from companies all around the world are utilizing Figma in new and interesting ways. That's over there, Dylan, who is the CEO, presenting about variables. And it's also a time where 8,000 grown adults came together, oh no, and decided that the most exciting thing that was going to happen to them on a Tuesday afternoon was a giant sticker wall of the Figma kind of cursors. And honestly, I don't blame them because I thought it was really fun too. And I put my name up there. So during this session, we're going to kind of break it up into a couple of different sections. But first, I want to talk about some of my favorite sessions. I am obviously not the presenter of these sessions. So if you are all interested in anything that I talk about, oh, sorry, my sections here are jumping around. If you're interested in any of them, they're all recorded on the Config website. I'll have links to them in the appendix after I share out this session. But I'm just going to talk about 3 that were highlights for me. And yeah, let's get started. The first one was, okay, see it's, okay. It was called Generative AI and the Creative Arms Race. As I'm sure it is no surprise to you, the topic of AI was a huge topic of conversation when a bunch of designers and some coders and many other people came together in this space. Obviously, we were going to talk about AI. And there was really a whole part of the keynotes dedicated to it, one whole afternoon. And the standout was this session for me that was delivered by Oveta Sampson, who's the director of UX machine learning at Google. And she is someone who has been working in machine learning for 10 years. So I feel like in this space where we are currently right now, where AI is the newest, greatest, shiniest thing on the shelf, where no one's really sure like how to approach it, where it's going to lead us, it was really reassuring to hear someone talking about it who has kind of been in the trenches of it for years. And she was almost like a calm in the storm, in all of the chatter surrounding it. What I found really interesting about her talk was she talked about this, as I have coined it, I don't think she actually had coined it, the design rectangle. So walk with me through this visual here. This rectangle that you're seeing here on the screen currently is where design happens. And the people who are inside of it are the people who are able to do design. So whether it's UX designers, whether it's visual designers, whether it's interaction designers, these are the people that kind of have access to it. But the theory that she was proposing was that UI is going to start to help us expand that rectangle. So it is now going to expand, and we're both going to lower the floor, the accessibility point of design, and also raise the ceiling for it. So how's that going to look? Well, I think on the top side of it, designers might be freed up with the production tasks that they're doing. Maybe they're working on a bunch of screens, or they're working on creating color palettes, variables. Maybe UI can help, sorry, AI, not UI. Maybe AI can help us in that production and free up some space so that we can continue to innovate more and experiment more. But at the same time, it also lowers the point of access for design. So maybe people who don't have designer in their title, or maybe don't feel as comfortable with design tools, maybe they can now start to feel like they have a buddy in the system. Maybe the tools can start to partner with them better and make it so that people other than just designers or designers earlier in their career can have access to this design rectangle. It's not a triangle. I think also what was really interesting about her talk was that she touched upon a couple of ways that even though AI is, probably far ahead of where we would have imagined it to be, there are things that still inherently make us human and not a machine. And she talked about some of our advantages. So we have advantages like drawing, adventuring, the advantage of the fact that we break rules and we daydream and we live life. And these are all very, very poetic. And if they're interesting to you, I recommend, and as I'll continue recommending, that you listen to these talks. But I think the drawing part of this was particularly interesting to me because, at least someone who went to design school and had to draw on marker to paper a lot. We talked a lot about that feedback cycle that happens when you physically put a writing utensil to paper and the really interesting studies that have been done as to what happens in your brain at that point. And yeah, I agree that these are probably advantages that we still continue to have over AI, at least today. I think as I reflected on this session, coming into this whole block of keynotes all about AI, I was kind of like, whatever. Like, I don't think AI is necessarily the most interesting thing on my mind. And while I still don't think that these talks suddenly caused a pivot in my career, I'm definitely not going to become an AI engineer. I really was intrigued by the discussion on how it lowers barriers of entry, particularly to new designers. I think a discussion that I was having with some people that I had met was, like, wow, this is so exciting. Like so many fun things being introduced in Figma, and we got variables and, finally got a preview. But all of these things make Figma a more complicated tool. And for us who have been, learning and growing with Figma as they've expanded, these just become kind of like, oh, like, let me learn this new thing and put it in my tool belt. Same thing happened when auto layout came out. But we've kind of been slowly expanding with the tool. And I think younger designers who may be just starting with Figma or people who aren't designers at all, it might start to feel like a really big jump to now get comfortable in this tool. And I feel like there could be some interesting ways that AI can start to maybe help them ease them into the programs, start to support them. So like the people can know the design principles, but this tool can help them create through it. I don't know, but that is my thought on this particular talk. The other one, next session that I found interesting as this presentation continues to lag, was a very different session, probably why it stood out to me. It was called Leading Through Uncertainty, Navigating Uncertainty, a very repetitive title, a title that was repetitive. But it was given by an individual whose name I will struggle through as he is from Iceland, but it is Haraldur Thorleif. I will not try. As someone whose last name gets butchered all the time, I will spare him that trouble. But he is the founder and CEO of Uino, which was then purchased by Twitter. But really, he's kind of a Renaissance man. Like I mentioned, it was a very different presentation than you would generally expect to hear at a design conference. I don't think most people were expecting to come in at Tuesday afternoon and be contemplating their mortality. But he spoke so poignantly about his life that you really just could not help but be engaged. He spoke about his life with disability. He talked about uncertainty, about hope. Like I said, I will continue to say, watch these people give the talks that they were paid to do, but it was really, really amazing. But my biggest takeaway from his talk was the sentence, an idea of not letting what you can't do stop you from doing what you want to do. The way that he presented it was, he's someone who couldn't draw, but he started a creative company. He can't play guitar or sing super well, and yet he started recording a series of, I want to call them music videos, but I feel like that's almost give a disservice to them. They're like these music films. He gave us a short clip of one of them, and I'm pretty sure half the room was crying by the end. Um, he also can't cook, but he's opened a restaurant, and he can't use a shovel, but he's now been a part of an organization that has built hundreds, if not thousands, of ramps for wheelchair users across Iceland, and now they're expanding into other parts of Europe. And yeah, I mean, it was a session that really made you think. And as I looked at this statement, I wanted to reflect on it in my own life too. I think as someone who has maybe designer or strategist in their title, I often think, okay, well, this part of design I can touch, or this part of design is probably a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. But even something like him talking about the restaurant that he's opened, it's always been this like way off dream in the back of my mind, and it still is a way off dream, but to think about and see how design principles can be used to put really beautiful and thought-provoking products and services into the world, I just found very inspiring. So highly recommend. And then the last session, sorry, give me a moment, I will take a drink of water, was entitled Transparency Always Wins, How Ethical Design Led to 23%. Now, I was like, oh, should I put the title in because it kind of gives away the punchline, but this session was given by a designer from Blinkist named JC, and it talked about she talked all about the work that they did around free trial cancellation notifications. That is a mouthful. So she started out by presenting this kind of user flow, talking about, okay, users start signing up for the 7-day free trial, they're using it, and then in day 7, they get charged for premium membership and they are unhappy. That's kind of the basis of this whole project, is that, users are afraid of being charged and they get upset when they get charged when they actually wanted to cancel their membership. And so the pitch of her design team was, okay, what if we gave people subscription reminders? Either, on day 6 or 7, say, hey, your free trial is about to end. Would you like to cancel? Or, do you want to pay? And I found it fascinating the way she talked about how this was pitched, because, at first glance, you'd be like, whoa, like we're pitching to remind people to not pay us. But the ways that they presented it to their stakeholders was first to consider morale. Adding this feature could bring higher morale. Another way that they positioned it was a value of their company that they kind of coin as defaulting to transparency always. And so that this experiment would really fit under that value for them. Other things that they talked about was wanting to find less low app ratings, less burden on customer service. And they said, we will carefully watch the data and see what happens. So they put in some goals into place to make sure that they could track how this experiment was faring. So they would say that it would be successful if they saw a 10% increase in trial signups and a 10% decrease in customer service complaints. Well, what actually ended up happening is they had a 23% increase in trial signups, a 53% decrease in customer service complaints, and as an extra bonus cherry on top, they had a 1,116% increase in push notification opt-ins, because that was obviously how they were going to notify users, hey, your free trial is about to end. And this is one really interesting data. And for me, the takeaways were really to see how to successfully, or see this as an example of how to successfully balance business goals and user goals, always bringing, data to the forefront. But even more importantly than that, recognizing that we don't need to have conversations of ethics versus conversions, that it can really be a both discussion, which is extremely an extremely positive thought, especially the more and more we get into articles of, dark UX is taking over, doom scrolling, and all these other things that dark UX, so patterns that basically kind of try to use psychology to trick you into doing things how they are really the way forward. But this is showing that, maybe that's not the case. And apparently, even since this feature went live, they're starting to see this become a standard for other subscriptions, which I thought was pretty fun. And I think it got featured on Apple's one of their releases. And personally, this was also very meaningful to me, as I had recently forgotten to cancel a free trial, and I had been paying for 3 months of something that I literally watched once. So these are the sessions. I wanted to take a quick pause here to see if anybody had any questions or comments before I move on and continue talking about some other things. Cool. I will take the silence as a please keep going. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about is the logistics, or as I said, how escalators can ruin an event. And these are just some, bizarre or not great things that ended up happening. And at first I was like, am I just putting this in to rant a little bit? And well, the answer of that might still be yes. As I was putting together this presentation, I was like, actually these things that ended up happening really have some surprising design implications, and I think they're interesting to talk about. So the first, remember I told you that there was 8,000 people at the conference. Well, when they had this conference in 2020, they had 800 people. And so that is quite the scale up. And as we were in the midst on the first day on Tuesday in these long lines because the main conference floor was kind of floor -1, and all of the breakout sessions were happening on floor 2. So to try to funnel 8,000 people up, 2 to 3 escalators to go up 3 floors was a logistical nightmare. And I'll give it to Figma. They were trying to manage crowds the best that they could. But I was like, what? Just because you've done it before does not mean that you are an expert in it. But I think also what became really interesting to me is seeing a very visual representation of how not thinking through every single step that a user takes. I recently wrote about user journeys and user flows for the Savas blog. And part of that is really understanding that you are capturing every step that a user takes to make sure that there are no gaps, no things that you may have overlooked. And here very much the escalators as a bottleneck were overlooked. And I'll give props to the Figma team, because the second day they really took people's feedback and made some changes that alleviated that. But it was an experience. I have never waited so long in line to go on an escalator. Now, the next thing that I'm going to talk about is pastries. For those of you who don't know, I am very passionate about pastries, but you might be wondering, how is this relevant to configure this presentation? Well, let me set the stage a little bit for you. It's Tuesday morning, or really maybe Monday afternoon, and Figma sends out an email saying, hey, Joe Biden is in town tomorrow. They're going to block off the whole street that the conference is on. So please come early so that you can actually get in, and we will provide breakfast. And I was like, fantastic. Don't have to think about breakfast. Let me just show up. So we show up, there's some people, and I see coffee. And I was like, really? You're telling us that you were going to serve breakfast and coffee is all you give us? And it's kind of sad, a little bit hangry, or quite a lot hangry. So we walk into the main conference room, we sit down, and there's people walking around with these trays, and they're like, do you want a donut? And I was like, sure, I would love a donut. At this point, I will eat just about anything. I open up the donut package, and it was the worst kind of donut possible. And this is my presentation, so I get to make this claim, but it was a maple glazed cake donut, which is just about the worst kind of donut that you could get. It was such a disappointment, but I was hungry, decided to just go with it, eat the donut. And later, a couple hours later, when I was in a breakout session, someone had told me that the opposite side of the room had croissants. I was up in arms. But what can we learn from this? I think that this actually tied pretty well into that transparency conversation, because um, keeping users informed, keeping your conference attendees informed, uh, allows them to be in control of what's happening. I would have taken my butt to the other side of the room and been a more satisfied user. So let me stop talking about pastries. And finally, tired users are the worst kind of users, or tired users are grumpy users. And though I'm not sure there can be many life or design lessons taken out of this, I just wanted to put that point here, that if you ever think that taking a red-eye flight from San Francisco to the East Coast is a good idea, you are mistaken. Don't do it. It'll be the worst, especially if you're in basic economy and can't pick your seat. But to sum this all up, I wanted to talk about, okay, why should you go to a conference? Why was it worthwhile for me? What did I get out of it? So the first thing that I got out of it was inspiration. I love coming into these spaces where the design community comes together and we get to see just how much bigger the design world is. I think we can every day sit and we see the projects that are ahead of us, the ones that we're working in, and we can start to get kind of blinders on our eyes. But seeing people from so many different industries talk about things that are important to them and the design problems that they're encountering just really reminded me that design is so expansive and it's so interesting, and I love talking about it. It was also a great time for me because I got to give feedback to Figma. Obviously, I don't know if this is the case for most conferences, but this one put on by Figma, I mean, they really, the research team really utilized their resources. They were like, hey, we're going to have 8,000 people here who love to use our tool. Fantastic. Let's interview them. So they had this little booth set up where you could talk to them. And it really made me feel, in the same way that talking to other designers from across the world made me feel engaged. This made me feel engaged. I'm like, heck yeah, the tool that I have up every day for 8 hours, I get to say, hey, this is what's bothering me. These are my pain points. Like, please solve this. I really appreciated that. Also, you can get some swag by participating in said research session. I got a fun hat. You could get a hat or Figma socks. I went with the hat. It was very fun. And finally, as the title of the presentation said, you can also eat some delicious food. Here it was soup dumplings. And the best soup dumplings in San Francisco, in my opinion, are in Dumpling Home. They are probably in the top 1 to 2 soup dumplings that I've ever had, which is high praise. Yeah, that was my experience at Config. And we don't have that much time before Drew takes over, but if there are any questions, I can answer them now, or any comments, and if not, Drew can wow us with his, I'm sure, prototype.